Hello and welcome back to This Day in History. It is June 5th, and it is a beautiful, bright, sunny day. Blue skies, not a cloud in the sky. I knew the sun would come back eventually. Um, we have some pretty interesting stuff today. We have um, the death of a couple political um, figures. We have the birth of a lot of interesting folks from um, journalists, financier, economists, to writers, to performers, politicians. Um, we even have a baptism and a plan for Europe is introduced on this day. Um, so let's get into it, shall we? So, very first off, we're going to do birthdays, and the very first birthday is uh, John Maynard Keynes. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Keynes. Uh, he is the um, he's known for the uh, Keynesian economics. And mostly what it was is that this principal model was a study on why um, on unemployment and why it lasts so long, that sort of thing. He was a financier, he was a journalist, and he was a an economist. He was from England, so he was born on this day in 1883. In 1898, Federico Garcia Lorca, he was a Spanish writer. He was born on this day. 1939, Joe Clark, not Principal Joe Clark from Lean on Me. Um, this Joe Clark was a Canadian politician, and he happened to be the youngest uh, prime minister of that country. He became prime minister. I believe it was 1974. I'm not sure about that, but or 79, somewhere in there. Uh, I read it once and I forgot it. Sorry. But he was born on this day in 1939. On this day in 1947, we have an American performer, performance artist, and author by the name of Laurie Anderson. Her birthday is today. Um, and then we have a couple other actors whose birthdays were 2 years apart. One in 1971, which was Mark Wahlberg. And you would know Mark Wahlberg, Marky Mark and the Funky Bunch, if you were into his music back in the, you know, late 80s, early 90s, mostly early 90s, I think. He's done a lot of movies. Shooter was one of his. Um, he was in Ted. It was like that teddy bear. I think that was him. Um, he's been in a lot of stuff. And I've seen a lot of his movies, and I'm just like drawing a blank now. Um, but yeah, he's done a lot of good stuff. Um, Two of the brothers, Donnie Wahlberg was another singer and actor. Um, who's done a lot of stuff. His older brother was in, Donnie was in Band of Brothers. He was in Blue Bloods. Um, yeah, a lot of they're pretty. I mean, I like them. I think they're talented actors, but that's just me. 1973, Neil Patrick Harris, Doogie Howser himself. um, Neil Patrick Harris he's known for being Doogie Howser back in the 80s. I remember, he was roughly my age. He's 2 years older than me. But, he played this child prodigy doctor, um, that had a personal computer, and he would journal. The end of the episode was usually him journaling about, the day's events or the week's events, or, whatever maybe. He would later he'd go on and do other movies. He did Harold and Kumar. where he played himself. He was in How I Met Your Mother, where he played a very promiscuous male. He was in Starship Troopers. So yeah, I mean, his birthday is today. So now we're going to go back into this day in history. 1723, social philosopher and political economist Adam Smith was baptized on this day in Scotland, in Fife, Scotland. 1849, absolute monarchy is abolished in Denmark, and it's replaced with what they called a constitutional monarchy. And that constitutional monarchy also came with a parliament. So they had an absolute monarchy where it was, everything is, the king reigns and that's it. But they kind of followed the English model where, you still have a king and queen, but Parliament is really the ruling body. And like in England now, we have King George. He took over after his mother passed away. He was coronated as king, and his wife is the queen. But the reality is that like he holds no real power. He's just kind of a figurehead. He's more of a symbolic leader for his people, because England has a long tradition of a monarchy. So so I mean, like that is an example of, I would say, is an example of a constitutional monarchy. However, just because they're constitutional doesn't necessarily mean that they're constitutional like we are. They are still a democracy, whereas we're still a republic. The difference between a democracy and a republic is a democracy can, while it may have a constitution, they can arbitrarily pick and choose when those constitutional rights can be amended. Whereas in our republic, our constitution is set up so that your rights can't be taken away, or it's supposed to be that way anyway, that your rights cannot be taken away because our rights are granted to us by our creator. That's what the founding fathers said. That's what they believed. So on this day in 1944, Allied forces entered Rome, which is pretty interesting because tomorrow is the day that they landed on D-Day. I didn't realize that we actually had a foothold in Europe, or more of a foothold in Europe. I mean, because they rolled into Rome. Rome is in northern Italy, and they were that close to Germany. I mean, you get through northern Italy, and then you're going through Switzerland and Austria to get to Germany. And tomorrow, June 6th, that's D-Day. That's the day that they landed on Normandy, and then systematically took back France from Germany. So it's interesting because, like, how did we beat Germany? Well, it's real simple. At one point, he was fighting a three-front war. He was fighting to keep the Allies from taking France. He was fighting to keep the Allies from taking Italy. He was fighting in the east against the Russians because he was dumb enough to go violate his treaty with Stalin and attack them, thinking that he could take them over. Dumb. He was so dumb. At any rate, so Allied forces roll into Rome in 1944. On this day, 3 years later, 1947, George C. Marshall, who was while Eisenhower was the supreme commander of operations in Europe, George C. Marshall was the general in charge of all of the army. He was the general of the army back home. So in 1947, he becomes secretary, or some point he became Secretary of State, and he gives an address to Harvard University, um, and he delivers the Marshall Plan. And essentially, what it was is that the Marshall Plan was a means of Europe to basically rebuild itself. They were to, you know, build up what was destroyed due to the war, build up their economy, build up their infrastructure, build everything up. And the United States was going to help pay for that. It was part of the nation building mentality. It was part of, like making friends out of your former enemies. Like you go in, you smash the crap out of them, you destroy them, and then you build them back up again, and then you make them friends. That's the ideology there. And I mean, we still do it today. Look what we did in Iraq. Look what we did in Afghanistan. As we were taking territory, we were going in there. We were trying to build schools, trying to build, what have you. The problem was that you had a lot of people that were not okay with that because it clashed with their social traditions. So, I mean, nation building is great on paper, but not necessarily very applicable sometimes. In 1968, it was on this day in 1968 that Bobby Kennedy, who was running for president, he had just finished the LA convention, and he had basically just won the Democratic nomination to run for president that year. He was at the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles, and a young radical by the name of Sirhan Sirhan would fatally shoot Bobby Kennedy, and he would die from his wounds. Like Lincoln, he didn't die right away. He died, the following morning. In 1981, we have the first reported case of AIDS, and this was following the detection of a rare form of pneumonia that were found in 5 homosexual men in Los Angeles. This is why very early on, AIDS was referred to as a gay-only disease. It was a gay-related disease because they felt that it was something that only gay men had contracted, which kind of led to the whole anti-homosexual movement there in the early 80s. But it wasn't converted and changed into being called AIDS until a few years later, when they had hard clinical data to suggest that it wasn't just a gay matter, it was an anybody matter. Anybody could get it. So then they changed it to AIDS, meaning the autoimmune deficiency syndrome. And President Reagan was president during that time, and they had some medical breakthroughs, and there were some experimental drugs they wanted to use, but the administration was a little hesitant on spending the money on it. There was a movie on it when Matthew Modine played the doctor that said, the administration's wrong. It's you're balking at the price tag here. It's insanely cheap now. Wait until we have hundreds of thousands of more cases where it's going to be way more expensive then. I don't know how accurate that is, but I mean, it makes sense that, like, if you had something that could have gone into clinical testing and might have, got your foot in the door as far as like containing, that's the thing, is like people get HIV, they can live 20, 25 years with HIV, which, I mean, and HIV can morph into full-blown AIDS. But it's like once you catch AIDS, that's the death sentence there. There's really no coming back from that. It's what Freddie Mercury passed away of. He was the frontman for Queen. I think Liberace passed from AIDS too. I can't remember. I can't remember if... It seems to me that like it was reported that when he passed it was from AIDS, but I'm not sure about that. Speaking of Ronald Reagan, he was our 40th president. He was an actor. He did a lot of stuff for Disney. He made a lot of war movies for like war documentary style movies, informational movies for the soldiers and such. He did a lot of stuff for the War Department, and yeah, so he ended up having Alzheimer's or dementia, one of the two. I mean, one kind of begets the other, but it's on this day in 2004, and I remember this day. I remember the funeral actually, but he died on this day in 2004 at the age of 93, and it was heartbreaking to see Nancy Reagan, his wife, slumped over his casket one last time, sobbing uncontrollably, and she kissed the top of his casket to kiss him goodbye. That was yeah, it was kind of it was heartwarming and heartbreaking at the same time. Yeah. So the last thing for today is it's 2012. Ray Bradbury, he is the author of Fahrenheit 451. He would pass away on this day at the age of 91. So that is your day in history. Hopefully you have a tremendous day. It's a great, beautiful day. Hope you're enjoying it. And we will do this again tomorrow. In remembrance of those brave souls that stormed the beaches of Normandy to kick the Nazis out of France and ultimately lead on to victory. What was it, like 6 months later, and rid the world of, a despotic dictator in the form of Adolf Hitler. So we will do that again here tomorrow. So stay tuned for that. Have a good day. Be blessed. Take care, and we'll talk to you soon.